All right, so today I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Democrats and the left in general. And this is something I brought up before, but again, there's always new viewers and there's always people that just don't know this kind of stuff. Now, this is of a picture tweeted out by James Woods that went pretty viral. Again, 8,000 retweets, 13,000 likes. Again, another good follow on Twitter if you don't follow him. But um, he says, although it's a matter of time before Google will find justification for erasing it. Now, again, he links to a picture saying this photo is taken at the 1924 Democratic National Convention. It was known as the Clan Bake, just in case you want to look it up. And it's a picture of a very large number of people, KKK members marching. And again, this is something that a lot of people don't realize, and of the ones that do realize it, a lot of people um, don't know the reality of it, and that they think that the reality is, oh, well, the parties switched, but the reality is that didn't happen. Again, because number one, there's only a very small number amount of people that actually physically switched, and even if you do think there was a switch, it wouldn't have happened until literally like within the last generation, because um, the first Democratic senator, I don't, or black Democratic senator that is, I don't think happened until like the 80s or the 90s. And again, like the whole switch thing, it doesn't make any sense because everyone who I've ever heard make that argument, I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, when did it happen?" And they'll probably come up with, "Oh, it happened over time." But okay, well then, when did it? When would you say you're confident in saying that it was done? And the reality is that they would have to wait till like literally the 90s or the 2000s even, to even try and make that argument. And I think it would be um, insane to make that argument. So that's the first thing I wanted to bring up. And again, the other thing too is again the it was always the Democrats that were pro-slavery. It was the Republicans that were against it. The NRA was founded, I believe, in part due to arm freed black slaves so they can defend themselves. Again, a lot of these things that just people just don't realize. I mean, you look at the other things too. It was the Democrats who filibustered and were against the civil rights movement in the 1960s or the Civil Rights Act. Again, so the reality is too is that that's what history is. And it makes perfect sense because the Democrats are still the ones that are racist to this day. Now, does that mean there's no racist Republicans or people who aren't on the left? Absolutely not. Of course, there's some people that are racist that are on the right. The difference being is that the media nowadays, number one, they lie about the history. I mean, they blatantly lie about the history. And number two, they amp up and elevate any sort of radical, any sort of radicalism or any of the crazy people that are on the right. They're amplified and made to look like they're a lot more um, popular and prominent than what people actually think. Like again, I mean, you look at the difference between a far right group and a far left group. I mean, how many people the far right groups kill a year, or even like seriously injure? Like hardly any. Like hardly any. But I mean, you look at Antifa; they're killing people. They're killing, or at the very least, seriously injuring people on a daily basis, pretty much these days. Again, so and the left would have you think that the reality is, oh, the left is far left violent or far less violent, and that's just not true. That's just not true. And just Antifa. That's not people who aren't even affiliated with Antifa that are crazy leftists. So again, that's the reality, and then the main point of the video is kind of to point out that um, you're lied to about history and you're lied to about the stuff in the current days. And the current going as far as the current day stuff go, who's the ones that support the racist stuff nowadays? It's still the left and still the Democrats. Who are the ones that support, these diversity hiring quota bullshit, that people um, try and advocate for it. What's always the left? I mean, you have these Democrats in California that are, I don't know if they actually went through with it, but there's talk that they wanted to end the civil rights legislation that was there because they want to hire people based upon their race. Again, which is the exact opposite of what the Civil Rights Act and anyone who's anti-racist would believe. But the reality is that they hate the Civil Rights Act because it is meant to. I mean, it's hardly ever practiced nowadays. It seems just. I mean, just based off the whole diversity hiring and diversity this, diversity that. If you actually believed in equality, you wouldn't believe in any of that stuff, because if you believe in the whole diversity crap, you believe in hiring people based upon their race, because you say, oh, blacks are X% of the population, therefore they should be X% of this, or women are X% of the population, therefore they should be X% of this. But again, they completely ignore other factors. They completely ignore other factors for the simple reason, if they acknowledged the other factors, it would completely disprove their argument. Again, if they acknowledged that, you know, women are less likely to want to work more hours, women are less likely to want to, I guess a better way of putting it is, women are a lot less ambitious. Again, you look at the top CEOs and the most successful businessmen, they tend to be the kind of people who are willing to work 80 hours a week and be incredibly ambitious. Women tend, I mean, there's always exceptions, but they tend to not be like that. And the problem too is that when you look at these CEO positions and people making $1 million a year, those are the extreme outliers. That's the equivalent of, you know, the NHL or the NFL players when it comes to comparing it to sports. They're the 1% of the 1%. So the reality is too is that when you look at the extreme outliers, the gap tends to be widened for the simple reason too that people point out, oh well, men are only 20% more ambitious than women, but the reality is that when you look at the far end, um, the gap widens that much more, right? So that's one of the reasons for that. And it's the same stuff with the whole blacks, you know, not getting or not making as much money, or not having as many CEO jobs or this jobs or that jobs. The reality is that blacks just aren't as intelligent on average. Again, I stress on average. And the other things too is that blacks, oftentimes it's promoted to not work hard and not work a traditional kind of job, because I mean, I don't think it's a huge issue, but the whole, you know, rap music and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you look at all these interviews. I've seen tons and tons of interviews of black people who admit, I mean, they're almost always ones who aren't on the left, but nonetheless, admitting that there is a big push when it comes to leftism, when you're black, amongst other blacks, especially the more left-leaning ones, to not be quote unquote white, which I think is a stupid way of putting it. But and what they mean by that is, you know, having the traditional family unit, working a 9 to 5, that kind of stuff. And that's stuff that should be not promoted. Like, again, if this is another reason why the left doesn't care about blacks and racism and all this garbage. They only care about it to score political points. If they actually cared, they would be promoting the family unit. They would be promoting all that kind of stuff. And because they're not, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the main reason they're pretending to care, um, is just to score political points. Again, so that's kind of what we have to go over here. But getting back to the main point, like I say, to kind of sum it up here, the left doesn't care about, you know, racism and all this garbage. Again, if they did, and this is something too, like I would somewhat let them off the hook if they just flat out came out and admitted and be like, yeah, we've always been the racist. We've been racist up until this day. We're going to change our ways. Like if they did that, I would largely forget about it. But again, they're never going to do that because they're doubling down on these stupid diversity hiring garbage and fake systemic, or at least largely fake systemic racism. It does exist to a degree, but it's a much smaller of an issue than the average person would have you think. Again, I've seen interviews of people going around asking black people, you know, how many unarmed blacks are killed in the average year, and they're saying like 1,000 is like the average answer, and the reality is it's like 10. There, people are literally overestimating it at a magnitude of like 100 times. Again, so, and this is another reason too why, you know, the media is completely and utterly biased, like to the nth degree. Because if they weren't, the average person would be able to give a pretty good guess. Again, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. If you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email, got linked in the description. Again, I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last few things, check me out on Twitter, Parlay, and BitChute. It's important you follow me on those other platforms, so make sure you check me out there if you haven't already. Yeah, and I'm going to leave it there.